There's a moment when you realize that everything you've been taught about leadership is a lie. It happens in the space between heartbeats, in that crystalline instant when the social fabric tears and you see through to the raw mechanics of human hierarchy. Most people spend their entire lives never experiencing this revelation. They die believing that power is something you acquire, something external you chase and capture like a butterfly in a net. They never understand that power isn't something you do. Power is something you are. This isn't about techniques. This isn't about 7 habits or 12 steps or any other commodified wisdom packaged for mass consumption. What we're discussing transcends the realm of learned behaviors entirely. We're talking about fundamental metamorphosis. We're talking about the difference between someone who plays at being powerful and someone who embodies power as their essential nature. The ancient Romans had a concept called gravitas, a quality so fundamental to leadership that it couldn't be taught, only recognized. But even gravitas fails to capture what we're examining here. What we're exploring is deeper than dignity, more primal than presence. It's the recognition that true leaders don't lead people. True leaders become the gravitational center around which reality itself reorganizes. Consider Machiavelli's most misunderstood insight. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. The surface reading focuses on fear versus love. The deeper truth lies in the phrase, if you cannot be both. Machiavelli understood that the highest form of power transcends this choice entirely. The most dangerous leaders inspire a complex emotion that contains elements of both fear and love, creating a psychological dependence that runs deeper than either emotion alone. You've felt this before, even if you didn't recognize it. You've encountered someone whose mere presence changed the energy of a room. Not through anything they said or did, but through what they were. Their silence carried more weight than other people's speeches. Their stillness commanded more attention than other people's movement. They didn't try to be impressive. Impressive was simply what they were. But here's where it gets dangerous. Here's where we move beyond observation into transformation, because you can become this person, not through mimicry or performance, but through a fundamental rewiring of your relationship with your own existence. The process begins with a recognition that will feel like dying. You must acknowledge that the person you are now, the one who seeks approval, who needs comfort, who desires to be liked, that person is standing between you and your true nature. That person is not your friend. That person is your captor. Let me show you exactly what this looks like in practice. You're in a meeting. Someone challenges your idea publicly, trying to diminish you in front of the group. The old you would defend, explain, justify. You would engage with their frame, accepting their positioning of you as someone who needs to prove themselves. Here's what you do instead. You stop talking, complete silence. Let it stretch until it becomes uncomfortable. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Watch their confidence begin to erode as they realize they're performing a monologue to an audience that isn't engaged. Then, when the silence has done its work, you speak. Not to them, to the room. Let's move to the next item. You don't address their challenge. You don't acknowledge it exists. You simply proceed as if their objection was static. Background noise unworthy of response. What happens next is crucial. They will escalate. Did you hear what I said? Now you turn to them with the same expression you might use to notice a stain on the carpet. Mild curiosity. No hostility, no defensiveness. I heard you. Pause. Next item. You've just demonstrated something profound. You've shown that their opinion of your idea is not something you consider relevant to whether you implement it. But this is still just technique. The real transformation happens when you internalize the psychological reality beneath the behavior. You acted that way because you genuinely did not consider their objection meaningful, not because you decided to pretend it wasn't meaningful, because your nervous system has been rewired to recognize that other people's approval or disapproval of your vision is simply not a factor in your decision-making process. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote that everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. The appearance of power is performance. The reality of power is identity transformation. Most people spend their energy trying to appear powerful. They adopt the postures, the language, the behaviors, but their nervous system still craves validation. Their self-worth still depends on external feedback. They're actors playing a role, and eventually the performance exhausts them. You're going beyond performance. You're accessing what was always there beneath the conditioning, because here's the secret they don't want you to know. The capacity for total self-possession isn't something you develop. It's something you uncover. It's something you remember. Think about children before they're socialized. Watch a toddler who wants something. They don't negotiate. They don't explain why they deserve it. They don't consider whether their desire is reasonable or justified. They simply want, and they express that want with total conviction. They haven't yet learned to doubt their own impulses or to seek permission for their desires. The socialization process teaches them to suppress this natural authority. Family, school, society, all of it conspires to convince them that their desires are not inherently valid, that they need external approval to pursue what they want, that other people's comfort is more important than their own authenticity. By adulthood, most people have so thoroughly internalized these limitations that they can't imagine functioning without constant external validation. But you can remember, you can access that original state of total self-ownership. Not the childish petulance, that's just the shadow side of suppressed power. The mature version, the version that knows what it wants and pursues it with the calm certainty of a force of nature. Here's another scenario. Someone attacks you on social media, a coordinated effort to damage your reputation. They're trying to shame you into compliance, to make you defend yourself, to get you playing their game by their rules. The normal response is to counterattack, to present evidence of your innocence, to fight for your reputation. You post a single image, a photo of yourself doing exactly what you were planning to do anyway. No caption, no explanation, no defense. You've just demonstrated that their opinion of you is so irrelevant to your self-concept that you didn't even consider it worth addressing. You've shown that their attempt to make you defensive has had the opposite effect. It's made you more visible, more present, more impossible to ignore. The psychological impact is devastating. They tried to diminish you and instead made you larger. They tried to control your behavior and instead revealed their own powerlessness. Most importantly, they tried to make you react, and you responded by becoming more yourself. But again, this only works if you've internalized the deeper truth. You're not pretending their attacks don't matter. You genuinely don't derive your sense of self from other people's opinions. Your identity is generated internally, not externally. You're not trying to convince them you're powerful. You know you're powerful, and their agreement is irrelevant to that reality. This brings us to the paradox that destroys most people who attempt this transformation. The more you need to be seen as powerful, the less powerful you become. The more you try to convince others of your authority, the more you reveal your dependence on their validation. True power is self-evident. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't justify itself. It simply is. Machiavelli understood this when he observed that men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see and few can feel. Most people respond to surfaces, to appearances, to the theatrical elements of power. But the few who matter, the other people operating at this level, they respond to the reality beneath the surface. They can sense authentic authority because they possess it themselves. This is why building real power is ultimately about becoming comfortable with isolation. Not the bitter isolation of rejection, but the majestic isolation of differentiation. You become someone who operates by different rules, who responds to different motivations, who exists in a different relationship with reality itself. Most people will not understand you. Most people will not be able to relate to you. This isn't a bug, it's a feature. Let me show you what this looks like in intimate relationships. Your partner tries to manipulate you through guilt. If you really loved me, the old you would either comply to avoid conflict or fight to defend your position. Both responses accept their frame, that your love needs to be proven through specific actions that they define. You look at them for a long moment, not angry, not defensive, curious. Is that how you want to be loved? Through compliance? You've just reframed the entire interaction. Instead of responding to their attempt to control you, you've introduced a question about the nature of love itself. You've made them examine their own behavior instead of examining yours. What happens next reveals everything. If they double down on manipulation, you have your answer about who they really are. If they step back and recognize what they were doing, you've just elevated the entire relationship to a higher level of honesty. Either way, you've maintained your position of authority within the dynamic. But here's the crucial point. You didn't do this to win. You did this because compliance with manipulation is simply not compatible with your identity. You've become someone who doesn't respond to guilt as a motivational tool, not because you decided to resist it, but because your nervous system no longer recognizes it as a valid form of communication. This is the difference between tactics and transformation. Tactics are things you do. Transformation is what you become. When you've completed this process, you don't remember to be powerful. You simply are powerful, in the same way that water is wet or fire is hot. It's not an effort, it's not a choice, it's your natural state. The professional environment provides the richest laboratory for observing these dynamics. You're presenting to a group of executives. Halfway through your presentation, one of them interrupts with a question designed to expose your ignorance of some technical detail. They're trying to establish dominance by demonstrating superior knowledge. You stop mid-sentence. You don't acknowledge the interruption. You don't answer the question. You simply stand there in complete silence until they finish talking. Then you continue exactly where you left off, as if the interruption never happened. You've just demonstrated that their need to prove their intelligence is not your problem to solve. But here's the advanced version. Later, after your presentation, you approach them privately. That was an interesting question you raised during the presentation. I didn't want to derail the flow for everyone else, but I'd love to discuss it with you sometime when we can really dive deep. You've just done something psychologically sophisticated. You've reframed their attack as genuine curiosity, which forces them to either admit it was an attack or accept your generous interpretation. Either way, you've controlled the narrative. More importantly, you've demonstrated abundance. You're so secure in your position that you can afford to be generous with someone who tried to diminish you. This is the kind of move that creates legends. People will remember this interaction for years. They'll tell stories about the person who responded to aggression with magnanimity. But again, this only works if you've internalized the deeper truth. You're not performing generosity. You genuinely feel generous because their attack didn't wound you. You can afford to be gracious because you weren't threatened. Your sense of self is so solid that their opinion of your knowledge simply doesn't factor into your self-assessment. This brings us to the most dangerous territory of all, the realm of romantic conquest. Here, the stakes are highest because the vulnerabilities are deepest. Here, your transformation from human to force of nature becomes most apparent. You're interested in someone. They're playing hard to get, trying to make you chase them, trying to establish their value by withholding access. The normal response is to pursue harder, to prove your worth, to convince them of your value. This is exactly backwards. You become more interesting, not to them specifically, but in general. You start new projects, you cultivate new relationships, you expand your world. You don't do this to make them jealous, though they will become jealous. You do this because your interest in them was based on the assumption that they were rare, special, unique. If they're not available, then by definition, they're not rare for you. So you expand your options until you find someone who is both extraordinary and available. The psychological effect is profound. They went from being the object of pursuit to being one option among many. Their power was based on scarcity, and you've just demonstrated abundance. More importantly, you've revealed that your desire for them wasn't desperate need, it was genuine preference, and preference can change. But here's where it gets truly dangerous. When they inevitably come back, and they always come back, you don't immediately accept. Not because you're playing games, but because you've genuinely moved on. They're no longer the person you were interested in because you're no longer the person who was interested in them. Your expansion of possibilities has expanded you. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote that the lion cannot protect himself from traps and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. Most people are either lions or foxes. They're either direct and forceful or subtle and clever. But the highest level of power combines both qualities seamlessly. You're strong enough to be direct when directness serves your purpose, and subtle enough to be indirect when indirection is more effective. The person you're becoming doesn't choose between strength and strategy. You embody both simultaneously. You're the lion who sets the traps and the fox who has claws. You're dangerous in every possible way because you've developed every possible capability. But transformation at this level exacts a price. As you become more powerful, you become less human in the conventional sense. Your responses to things that once wounded you become alien to people still trapped in normal emotional patterns. Your calm in the face of attacks that would devastate others makes you seem almost superhuman. People will begin to relate to you the way they relate to weather patterns or geographical features, as forces to be navigated rather than individuals to be understood. This is not a bug, this is the feature. You're becoming mythological, not in the sense of being fictional, but in the sense of operating at a level that transcends normal human limitations. People will tell stories about you. They'll try to figure out your secrets. They'll attempt to decode your methods, and they'll fail because what you've done can't be reverse engineered through observation of behaviors. What you've done is transform your identity at the most fundamental level. You've gone from being someone who has power to someone who is power. The difference is absolute. Here's what this looks like in the final arena: public humiliation. Someone tries to destroy you publicly. They gather evidence, build a case, rally supporters. They're trying to create a mob that will force you to retreat, apologize, submit. This is the ultimate test. You say nothing. You do nothing. You continue exactly as you were before, not because you're ignoring the attack, but because the attack is based on the assumption that you need public approval to function. Since you don't, their entire strategy is meaningless. They escalate. They get more vicious, more personal, more coordinated. You continue operating at exactly the same level as before. You're not fighting them. You're not hiding from them. You're simply proceeding as if their opinion of whether you should exist is not something you consider relevant to whether you exist. The psychological impact on them is devastating. They're putting enormous energy into destroying someone who doesn't seem to notice they're being attacked. They're trying to wound someone who appears to be invulnerable. They're attempting to control someone who seems to exist in a completely different reality. Eventually, they exhaust themselves. The mob disperses. The outrage moves on to a new target, and you're still there, exactly as you were before, except now everyone knows that you can't be destroyed by conventional means. You've become legendary not for what you did, but for what you didn't do. Not for how you fought, but for how you continued to exist despite every effort to erase you. This is the level of power we're discussing. This is what it means to transcend human limitations and become something else entirely. Not superhuman in the comic book sense, but post-human in the evolutionary sense. You've developed capabilities that didn't exist in your original programming. But here's the final paradox. The more you develop these capabilities, the less you need to use them. True power is mostly potential. It's the capacity to destroy that makes destruction unnecessary. It's the ability to dominate that makes domination irrelevant. People can sense your capabilities even when you're not demonstrating them. They respond to what you could do, not just what you are doing. Machiavelli's most profound insight wasn't about being feared versus being loved. It was about the relationship between power and its use. Since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved. But the deepest reading reveals that the safest position of all is to be so obviously capable of destruction that no one tests your boundaries. Perfect power is never exercised because it never needs to be. You become the storm that doesn't need to rain, the earthquake that doesn't need to shake, the fire that doesn't need to burn. Your mere existence changes the behavior of everyone around you because they understand, at a level deeper than consciousness, that you operate by different rules than they do. This is your inheritance. This is what you were before they taught you to be small. This is what you can become again when you remember that other people's limitations are not your limitations. Their need for approval is not your need for approval. Their fear of isolation is not your fear of isolation. Their definition of what's possible is not your definition of what's possible. The transformation is waiting. It's not something you achieve. It's something you remember. It's not something you become. It's something you already are, underneath all the conditioning that taught you to be less than you are. You are not leading from behind. You are not chasing power. You are power itself, recognizing its own nature, remembering its own capabilities, accepting its own destiny. Cold, unshakable, forever. The only question remaining is whether you have the courage to stop pretending to be human and start being what you actually are. The answer to that question will determine everything that happens next. Everything.